Welcome today to a new program. People's Visioning in Columbia, Missouri is going to have a set of regular programs on MediaCom. We want to thank MediaCom for hosting this information for folks around the state that's very vital to share with members of our local, regional, and statewide community. I'm Monta Welch. I'm the director of People's Visioning, and today we're going to be speaking a lot about food and water security and quality, and we have some guests with us. We have Shirley Kidwell, who is the secretary of Friends for Responsible Agriculture, and that is a new organization that's just forming in Hatton, the Hatton area near Fulton, in Callaway County. And we have Tim Gibbons, who is with us from the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. And Missouri Rural Crisis Center works across the state, so we'll be looking at both local issues and statewide issues. Today we're wanting to share with you something that's going to be on the August 5th ballot. It is something that came very last minute out of our state legislature in terms of the ballot that it would be on. Many folks thought that it would be on the November ballot, and in the last day or so of the legislature and immediately following, it was moved to the August ballot. So it took a lot of folks by surprise, and so the folks in the state, the regular people, People's Visioning, the general populace, small farmers, we're scrambling to get the word out about what is Amendment 1, an amendment to our state constitution, about, and what would it do. So my guests and I are going to discuss this today, and I would like to first invite Tim Gibbons to tell us a little bit more about Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and to start by telling us the language of the ballot and some thoughts he has when he works a lot with the legislature. So Tim.
Monta, I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity. Missouri Rural Crisis Center has been around since 1985. We started during the farm crisis in the 80s, when farms were being foreclosed upon because of the land bubble, sort of similar to the 2008 housing bubble. Land was way up, farmers were borrowing off their land, there was new technology, and then land went through the floor. And Missouri, the organizers of Missouri Rural Crisis Center back in the early 80s organized farmers to stop farms being foreclosed upon. And since then, Missouri Rural Crisis Center became an organization in 1985. And since then, we've worked to organize farmers around policy issues, whatever was affecting them and their communities, rural economies. So I've been with MRCC since 2005. One thing that we've always worked on, or we unfortunately always have to work on down in the legislature, is the ability of counties, it's local control, the abilities of counties to set protections against industrial livestock operations, or what's defined as concentrated animal feeding operations. Oftentimes those operations are operations that have absentee owners. The hogs oftentimes usually are owned by multinational corporations, and the effect on property rights of neighboring farms is immense. And we think that farmers should have the ability to enjoy their lives, enjoy their quality of life, enjoy their own farming operation, be able to farm.
So what you're saying is this is sort of like the rights of some farmers versus the rights of other farmers who might decide to go into these operations. You said confined animal feeding operations, and some people call them CAFOs.
I would more define it as the rights of farmers versus the corporations trying to take control. And as an example, we've seen in the hog marketplace what happens when corporations take control of a market. And since 1985, Missouri has lost 90% of our hog farmers. Over 20,000 hog farmers are now out of business in Missouri because corporations control not only the marketplace, but also in a sort of gray area way, they control the democratic process. So they control the way policies are created both in Washington, D.C. and in Jeff City. It's not by accident. It's not inevitable what has happened to the hog marketplace. It was very intentional, and it was put in place by both policies that they push, the corporations that control the marketplace, but also by a lack of policies that they attempt to stop and do stop, because such as antitrust regulations, which is a fancy word for monopolization of the marketplace, and the government being able to control that.
And so what is MRCC trying to do about it?
Well, we organize farmers. So we're a group of, we're 5,600 member families. The vast majority of them are family farmers, independent family farmers. And we work with these farmers to not only figure out what's going on in their communities, in all of our communities, I guess, and then try to work on the policy side to make sure that their economies and their farming operations and their families and their communities all remain viable in the first place, but secondly, the goal is for them to flourish, because they should be flourishing. They're producing something that we all need, which is a healthy food source.
We have to eat, and we'd like it to be healthy,
that's
quality food. So your operation and the farmers that you just mentioned you have, they're farmers from all across the state.
Yes, ma'am.
And so your organization essentially, and the views of these farmers, is that this Amendment 1, which is called the Missouri Farming Rights Amendment to the state constitution, is something that they would like folks to know that it doesn't support them. It's not about them, the small or independent family farmers, and that's just some nice sounding language basically to essentially kind of mislead the voters who don't know much about farming or the rural community life and can be sort of duped by this language.
Well, I mean, it's not just Amendment 1. Working down in the legislature for many years in Missouri, oftentimes things get put in a nice little box and with nice little words around them, but they mean a complete opposite thing. And firstly, it was first defined as the Right to Farm Amendment. Now it's called the Farmers' Rights Amendment, which they changed the name of it. We were instrumental in the legislative process trying to stop this bill. We did fortunately get it cleaned up a little bit. I do have the original language of the bill. The original language had things like modern farming and ranching practices shall be forever guaranteed in the state, and nothing can abridge the right of farmers and ranchers to employ agriculture technology and modern livestock production. They never defined what these words were now. They never defined it's a constitutional amendment, so they never defined what the words are 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now.
What does this mean?
What does this mean? Does this mean cloned animals? Does this mean, the ability to completely control the marketplace? Does this, it's so vague.
What are those rights?
You have no idea. This language, exactly that language, the original language that has modern and ag technology, was the language that was passed in North Dakota. This language is going around to different states. It's ALEC legislation, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is a bill mill for corporate interests. So this isn't a Missouri thing, and they didn't come up with it down in Jeff City. They're trying to pass it all over the country because corporations don't want to have any accountability. They don't want to have liability.
They don't want to have any statutes they have to follow.
They want to be able to do what they want, when they want, how they want. And we luckily got that modern language taken out. We got the agriculture technology taken out.
But in truth, though, because the language is so vague, I think that's great, and it would be something people would try to do. But on the other hand, it really, if their rights are forever guaranteed, in some ways they could just say, well, that's, it still kind of fits.
Totally. No, you're exactly right. And the issue is the vagueness of this bill, and I heard Senator Mike Parsons say it on the Senate floor, and he was instrumental in getting this bill passed. Only the court system will decide what this bill really means. And unfortunately, as we know, that Sometimes in the court system, whoever's got the most money wins. Also, oftentimes in the court system, it's a court system based upon attrition. So, Monsanto and Cargill can just outlast the
Right.
money of the family farmer that's on the other side.
Right.
They in the legislature they try to take away local control. They try to take away state standards that protect farmers from industrial livestock. They try to take away the rights of farmers to protect themselves and their property rights in the court system through lawsuits when a big operation moves next door to their farm and decimates their property rights. And this constitutional amendment, the purpose of it, is to enable them to have an argument in a court of law. So when Cargill does put an operation next to your farm or somebody else's farm, that they can go to court and say, well, we have a constitutional right to do whatever we want.
Right. And so in the Constitution, the Constitution essentially trumps all the other statutes that we've been operating with that does at least allow some farmer-to-farmer restitution should there be a need for that. And again, like you said, they just don't want any regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask Shirley to jump in here a little bit because she's working with some neighbors and the Friends for Responsible Agriculture, and I'd like her to say a little bit about what both that organization and what's going on in her neighborhood that relates to what we're talking about.
Thank you, Monta, and thank you for inviting me today. What is happening in our neighborhood is very, very recent. May 15th, 4 neighbors received letters from Pinnacle Group in Iowa representing Eichelberger Farms that said they were going to purchase 20 acres of ground just south of Interstate 70, about 18 miles east of Columbia, and they were going to put a facility with 7,600 sows and 2,500 gilts on that 20 acres. And this was notification required by Missouri DNR. And it said that the nutrient management plan would be filed within a few days with DNR. To date, nothing has been filed. There's no application for a permit. But the neighbors in the area were very disturbed and talked among themselves and began trying to get answers. On June the 10th, we had a public meeting at Hatton McCready School, attended by over 225 people.
A lot of Columbians joined you.
Some Columbians, but most of them
concerned.
were people in the area, Calawegians, and people in the North Callaway area specifically, wanting answers about the facility. The farmer who was going to sell the ground showed up and spoke to the issue. The people from Iowa did not come. And so we have now formed a group called Friends of Responsible Agriculture, and we are trying to put together information about it. We have a petition drive going now and a Facebook page under Friends of Responsible Agriculture with a link to the online petition asking people to help support our neighborhood. The neighborhood that this operation is planned for is just south of Interstate 70. It is primarily cattle, hay, pasture, and small grain fields, not large, massive grain farms. The people there just simply don't want a pig farm affecting their life.
Right.
And so
There's a lot of quality of life issues when you are living very, very close to what is often called a CAFO, confined animal feeding operation.
well, our neighbors are concerned about water quality. We're concerned about pulling down the water table and losing our wells. We have cattle. We have there are other animals in the area, horses, alpacas. There's organic farmers that all depend on that water quality for their farming operations. Mm-hmm. We're concerned about the manure being spread from that operation around us and run off into the creeks and tributaries surrounding that would pollute that area and run into the water that our animals drink.
Mm-hmm.
So
Didn't you say, we were visiting, and I think you mentioned that there has this particular arrangement, a farmer who's looking to sell this land or put in these the hog facility, does have already some hogs, and that there has been a past experience with something that you could maybe cite that one of your neighbors has already experienced.
well, in 1994, this particular farmer had proposed a 50,000 hog facility in the same neighborhood. It was a Cargill facility with Cargill's pigs. And at the time, there were no requirements for notification or anything. But when we found out about it, the neighborhood became very upset. 50,000 hogs would have produced more manure than the human waste in the entire city of Fulton. So
It's a big issue.
it was a big issue countywide, and after 2 public meetings, the farmer agreed that he would not enter into an agreement with Cargill to operate such a facility, and that died. At the time, he was building a facility for 5,600 hogs, and we were not aware, most of the neighborhood was really not aware what the effects of that would be. So he completed it, and I believe a couple of years later put pigs in the facility, and the problems became immediate. The odor was horrible. Most of us at that time didn't have air conditioning in our homes, so we would wake up in the middle of the night coughing, choking, and from the odor.
And different things.
And it depended on the direction of the wind who got the odor on any particular day, but it was present somewhere nearly every day. Mm-hmm. The problem was also with an open lagoon. That odor was present. There were flies, there were rats on the road. The manure was being spread with a spray gun in the air, and there was a fish kill. DNR was cited them several times for fish kill in the pond for runoff into the tributaries of Stinson Creek. So the neighbors, who are also farmers and they understand farming, got together and entered into legal agreement with that owner to make certain improvements that would mitigate some of the problems. And after he made those improvements, we sort of backed down. Part of that agreement said that he would not put another hog within 5-mile radius of the existing facility.
More than the size he already had.
Exactly, that he would not add any more hogs within a 5-mile radius. And so that agreement is still in effect today. However, he is the farmer who is bringing in Eichelberger Farms out of Iowa with this operation on 20 acres. And so we are fighting that as well.
So the neighbors have, this Facebook page, Friends of Responsible Agriculture, and I'd encourage folks to learn more about the farming neighbors' struggle here to find solutions and or to honor promises to help the quality of life of the farming neighborhoods and certainly the surrounding communities. I think it's really pretty clear from the descriptions that you've given, and I've done some research online as well, that the pollution is very extreme, and that I've heard that and either of you can elaborate on this, but in slaughtering the pigs that are in these kinds of confinements, that oftentimes a lot of tumors are found, and recently I've heard that the intestines are shredding of some of the animals in these confined operations. I don't know what, obviously their quality of life has to be pretty bad as an animal, right there, and they breathe the fumes, and I've seen some of the animals actually die from this, and a lot of antibiotics have to be used for the kinds of conditions. So if either of you want to speak to the type of quality of end food product in addition to in terms of, the health of the end product, I don't know if that's something either of you would want to speak to.
Well, firstly, and Shirley, very good job.
Thank you.
The Eichelberger Farms is a co-owner of Triumph Foods. Triumph Foods is number 2 on the pork powerhouses. So they are humongous. I mean, they have huge control over the marketplace. So it's, and at the public meeting, they made it sound like they were just a family farmer. Well, they're a corporate operation that's moving down from Iowa. It's an absentee ownership. It's the opposite of a family farmer. This is a corporate operation. Mm-hmm. And then when you referred to Cargill, it made me recollect the organization that is actually pushing this Amendment 1. They're called Missouri Farmers Care. Once again, nice little box put around a corporate agenda. And Cargill and Monsanto are both partners within Missouri Farmers Care. Also a partner is a law firm called Lathrop & Gage. Lathrop & Gage is the law firm that represents Smithfield when family farmers that have these operations move next door to them file nuisance suits. So they're Smithfield's lawyer. They have a vested interest in trying to take away the right of farmers to protect their property rights through the court system. And actually our Senator, Kurt Schaefer, is a lawyer with Lathrop & Gage, and he represents Smithfield in many of these cases.
So the conflict of interest in
definitely.
our legislature,
I mean,
in our government.
It runs rapid.
Global.
I can't necessarily speak to the things you were talking about with hogs. One thing that I can speak to is a recent thing that just happened, and it's the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. What happens when you concentrate thousands of hogs in a small area? They don't really use their new technology is deep pit systems. That makes technology in quotes because they have slatted floors. The effluent, the hog effluent waste goes into deep pits underneath the barns. And it stays there until it flushes it out and puts it on the fields. That is a recipe for disease. I mean, obviously. And what we've seen over the last year is it's called PEDV. It has really hurt the piglets are not able to survive. They get this diarrhea virus. Apparently, it's 99.9% similar to a diarrhea virus that was in China that was affecting hogs. It hugely affected the marketplace too. Hog prices went up, and pork prices went up. So I think that the system of concentrated animal feeding operations, putting thousands and thousands of livestock under in one building in cramped areas where their waste is kept underneath them. Is a recipe for disease, not only within the livestock, but potentially within humans. Right. And the use of antibiotics, subtherapeutic antibiotics, subtherapeutic antibiotics, which means they're low doses. It is meant for growth, right. But also to stave off any disease that comes from the sort of conditions they live in. Is a big deal too, and I think
and the resistance that can create, antibiotic resistance.
There's
strains.
MRSA. Yeah, there's MRSA that's going it's rampant around our country, and it comes from a lot of different things. But the overuse of antibiotics in livestock is not a good thing, and I think 70% of antibiotics in this country go to livestock. That's a huge amount of antibiotics going to livestock, and the ability of things to mutate based upon that overuse of antibiotics not only can affect the animal and livestock population, but also the human population in the long run, and we don't want to see that happen.
Right. And so adding to this conversation of, the quality of the meat based on their environment and, the antibiotics, et cetera, the issue of, feed for the livestock and the hogs is something I know a lot of folks that I speak to have some concerns with, because most of the grain that is fed to the livestock that we're talking about is from genetically modified grain sources at this point. A big portion of it is. And the genetic modification has a lot of different reasons, but the end result is that the seeds have been modified to withstand the herbicide and pesticides that are used to make the bigger corporate model farming easier and more able to, like you were saying, you have the small grain farms in your area, not the really giant grain farms. So it makes these giant operations easier to do. And I guess the bottom line, profit margins, et cetera, on top of which the seed stock is not something that it's patented, and so the farmers can't save their seed. So there's a lot of different problems within the context, various problems of the genetic modification of the GMO grains, some of which are these chemicals that they're modified to withstand in the fields. The super weeds have been created that then cause the need for more applications or stronger chemicals to combat the ever strengthening and the weed resistance, sort of like what we're saying with the antibiotics and the resistance of the viruses and bacteria. So it's kind of a system that doesn't seem not only healthy, but very sustainable in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any comments you'd like to make on
Well,
that?
I think in most cases, farmers tend to be a very independent lot. They don't like to be told what to do. They want to run their farms their way, to build the facilities they need on their farms their way. But in this case, they're not being allowed to run their farms their way. The big corporations are coming in and doing on other pieces of property things that affect the small farmer. And they're essentially putting him out of business. And as far as right to farm, I believe our farmers have that right to farm on their own property today. They don't have the right to go out and run an operation that harms another farmer.
Right.
And that, I believe, is the big issue.
So right to farm is right to harm.
Yes.
And that's what we really want to make sure that the public understands. And we also need the public to understand that this is a system of shallow pockets, actual real small farmers. And as we talked earlier, you know, they're not the folks with the deep pockets and the money that can withstand the lawsuits and, you know, buy off our legislators and our government, in fact. In fact, the studies out of Princeton have confirmed, recent studies announced this year, have confirmed what folks in the field, a lot of us have felt in our gut, that we really don't have a democracy, functioning democracy here in America anymore. And Princeton did some studies on this issue and came out and said, well, guess what? Those folks out there were right. And the definition that they felt best described what we have is an oligarchy, meaning that these wealthy and influential classes of people essentially have control of our governing systems, which is why we have so many of these things. And you were talking about this legislation being introduced in other states, so we want to have Missourians watching this program to tell their friends in other states, check out what's going on in your state legislature, and kind of sound the alarm there. But also for us, our own selves, we only have 4 weeks to get the word out. And we're asking everyone to tell their friends. We're asking you to tell at least 10 of your friends and ask them to do the same, because we are very much working on, you know, people power, the word of mouth, and it takes a little time to get that out there. So hence this kind of last minute move to move us up from November to August 5th to determine this. And I want to make 2 other points here. One is that the proponents who think that you should vote yes often talk about outside interests coming in to, you know, tell Missouri and Missouri farmers and Missouri what to do. And so in this case, as you made a point earlier in our program, and I just kind of want to reiterate that, you know, these are essentially outside interests of their own.
Oh, there's no doubt.
And so it's a little bit disingenuous to point a finger. And I think that ultimately we have to look at the sustainability of our systems, from whether it's our food all the way to our governing and how we would interact with our neighbors, to have a healthy neighborhood that is sustainable in the long term instead of ruined by something that another neighbor does. And you seem like you'd like to add something, and I'd like to.
Well, I think it's about respect for your neighbor, respect for your community, having the values of respecting the land and being a good steward of the land, and caring for animals. And obviously they are our food source, but caring for them in a respectful way.
Right.
And most good farmers and small independent farmers see the farming of the land as stewardship.
Right.
We have 100,000 farms in Missouri. We're second just to Texas. We have a lot of farms in Missouri, and they are the average farm size is about 300 acres, and just came out in the 2012 census. We've got 500 CAFOs. That's 1/2 of 1%. Why are we possibly passing a constitutional amendment that protects 1/2 of 1% at the expense of the rest of the 99.5% of family farmers that were
Right.
oftentimes here first, oftentimes here for generations, that are doing exactly what Shirley was just talking about?
Exactly.
And that you pointed out, ever since they came here, they already had and still already have the right to farm.
And just look around us. I mean, we've got. I mean,
We
it's-
don't need something
We've got farm. Yeah, I
else
mean,
to say we can go out and
mhm,
farm.
Yeah, yeah.
And as Tim says, these big operations are not farmers.
They're not
They are
farms,
not
yeah.
living on the farm. They're big investors.
And they're big industrials, yep.
stockbrokers and people who are looking only for profit.
So I think that that's really the message that we want to share with the folks that would pick up on this television program. And we'd like to ask you folks to amplify the message and really get the word out. And I'd just really like to, again, on behalf of People's Visioning, thank MediaCom for this time slot, and to thank Shirley Kidwell, representing herself, her neighbors, and as the secretary for Friends of Responsible Agriculture, because I think that's what we all want, and that's what we think of when we think of protecting the family farmers, which this is anything but. And I'd like to also thank Tim and all the work that you and everyone else does at the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, because this is another one of those crises that we have to deal with. And so I'd just like to wrap up. If anyone would like to have a closing remark, you're welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I would actually. We didn't talk about Smithfield.
Yes,
one thing
we-
that I think
we
is
would
really
like to talk
important
about
in the last year in the legislature, in an ag omnibus bill in the last week, a representative from North Missouri, from Harrison County, and slipped into an omnibus bill. And these are big bills with a bunch of different issues in them.
Right.
The ability of foreign corporations to own Missouri farmland. And 2 weeks later, in the legislative, this was last week of the legislative session. 2 weeks later, Smithfield gets bought by Shangwei, which was China's biggest meat packer. They now changed their name to the WH Group. So right now in Missouri, we have 1% of our farmland can be owned by foreign corporations. Smithfield Foods is owned by China, or Chinese corporation, multinational Chinese corporation, and Smithfield controls 26% of the pork slaughter. So they control 26% of the pork in our country.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Also, JBS Swift, which is a Brazilian company, is #1 in beef slaughter and is one of the top 4 in pork slaughter. And we're essentially giving them the right to farm in Missouri too, or the right to farm in Missouri. I think that these multinational corporations need to be held accountable and need to be liable if they do things that are wrong, if they affect the property rights of people, if they affect the environment, if they put a cost onto taxpayers. A lot of this system that we have is propped up by taxpayer dollars, because the lobbyists for these corporations have the ability to influence policy, which has the ability to influence where taxpayer dollars go. And
And Smithfield got a lot of our taxpayer dollars.
oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And these operations are getting guaranteed loans from the government. They're getting EQIP dollars, which are conservation dollars. They are getting a lot of, the land grant universities, like the University of Missouri, are writing grants to these private corporations and developing industrial agriculture, including GMOs, but also the CAFO system that we have. So we just have to realize that not only is this not inevitable, not only is the policy thing happening, but also through the policy thing, our dollars are being used against us to prop up a system that not only is bad for the environment, bad for farmers, bad for communities, but really bad for the food system in general.
And one of the reasons China is looking elsewhere is because they've ruined about 40% of their land because they don't have environmental stewardship or regulations. And when the good farmers do, they don't have to worry about the laws and the statutes, really. But it's the kind of bad actors, I guess, that once in a while you do need some laws for. And so we don't have to be afraid of some regulations. Like you said, there wasn't a DNR regulation when that very first episode of trying to put in this hog farm was there, but now
That's
there
correct.
is, and so now they do have some steps that they have to go through. So it is a benefit to have some regulations, and the folks that are kind of playing by the rules don't have to be afraid of those regulations. Sometimes those can be onerous. However, if this goes into our Constitution, we would have no rights to correct something that is onerous. We would have no say-so. So this is a huge thing to call for a constitutional amendment that would trump everything that we could do.
It's not about protecting farmers, it's about protecting corporate agribusiness. And that's just, it's a nonpartisan issue. It's a bad amendment.
Exactly. Very bad amendment.
And just one last mention before closing, because people will talk about the outside interests and they talk about the puppy mill thing, because a lot of people here, I don't usually like to bring that up necessarily, but to have the complete conversation. There were some the Humane Society had took some efforts, and there was a vote of the people to try to get our state to be a little less infamous for the way puppies and just their moms, the whole process of raising the dogs, to clean that process up so it wasn't so much like a CAFO for pigs, for just give it a few regulations. Now, if folks think that they should be allowed to raise more animals, more dogs, then we still right now could go down to the legislature and increase that a little bit. We would have some say-so to make something a little better. But right now, if this were to go through, we wouldn't have any way to regulate anything one way or the other.
Well, I think one thing that's really important about that is Prop B passed, 2010, I believe. The next year, the legislature came and changed it. So the ability of the legislature to pretty much change any statute they want, even if it's put forth by a ballot measure, that's what they can do. So it once again makes this bill or this amendment sort of moot, because if they can come and just change a statute whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, then why? It just doesn't make much sense.
Right. So some folks have said, though, that, and I haven't read way deep into the material, but some folks have said that the legislators are not going to be able to legislate on top of this. It would take a very strong act of the people, a lot more effort than what it will take to stop it now and on August 5th at the polls. But to take it out of the Constitution, it would be huge and very difficult. And in doing that, it also, as we talked about here, does abuse some of the farmers' rights, some of the small family farmer rights, and it also takes away the rights of the people to have a referendum on this issue. Should they just simply want to have a GMO labeling request, for folks to be able to know what's in their food? It takes away the rights of those people to referendum on this, anything that fits in with this issue. So those are some important pieces. And thanks for spreading the word, folks, and make sure you get out and vote on August 5th. We do have a website that you can learn more about this. It's www.votenoonone.com. You can sign a pledge there and help spread the word. If you are a small farmer hearing this and you might like to endorse the campaign with your farming business name, we welcome you to contact us. And a lot of different organizations have endorsed this effort. So when I say us, People's Visioning has endorsed the Vote No on One campaign, and we're trying to help let the folks know what a serious issue this is. So thank you for watching today.